Game of Subs has a smooth taste to it, kind of like prime 2017 Perkz when he was banging on even an international level. It has no sugar, so you won't get too hyphy like Caps when he used to int in Season 9 summer. So why not get help and succeed like those two did, teaming up by managing your energy levels? Plus, get a discount like apparently Cloud9 did to make Carlos's deal for Perkz work. In this case, 10% off with the code Thorin, Thorin, at GameSubs.gg. Now, G2, especially the G2 we were talking about in Season 9, Season 10, mainly Season 9, was of course a super team. Not entirely the most strictest definition. Every player wasn't like a superstar player necessarily elsewhere. But you look like Wunder, Jankos, Caps. They were definitely the best or contender for best in their role going into that year. Perkz had never played AD, but as a player was obviously the best or one of the best at mid and generally thought of as a great player generally. Mickey X was a little bit more questionable. He was more like player hype, or people who were experts thought he was very good, but he hadn't been quite the superstar, like must-sign player. But generally an extremely strong team. And of course, one of the things that happens when you make super teams is then people start talking about, is it unfair? Or like, how do we divide up? Like, is the player who wins now, if he has 6 championships over his career, we'll look at all the help he had versus a guy who, like, for example, if you go and you look at some of the teams that win where it's just one really great player and then a bunch of okay players, I would say not quite entirely like that. But I think some of the Rocks Tigers performances, like when they won in Season 6 summer, for me, that was like Smeb was truly great. Peanut was like good on some levels, but had his flaws. Kuro was okay. Praying Gorilla were good, but in a different sense, and they weren't the primary characters. So for me, Smeb gets a lot more credit there than actually if we'll talk about the KT super team that he won in later on when he had all these monster players with him. But the interesting thing actually about the G2 super team, and part of why it spurred the thought to make this video, is I actually didn't see much backlash against those players at the time for teaming together. Even though Perkz and Caps playing together, you would think people should surely criticize someone there. Like, what, we're the 2 best players, the 2 best at our role, and we're going to team up. Like, surely someone then gets the sense that, like, oh, well, you're joining him because you couldn't beat him or something. That's the weird thing. But the reason why I think it didn't happen is because Perkz was role swapping. So as a result, like, first of all, it didn't feel as much like, oh, it's so unfair for Perkz to do that, because it's like he has to be good at his role as well. And also the uncertainty of how good he'd be at his role, if this mix would even work, gave people, you'll forget now because they won so much and they were so dominant, and now it's just a foregone conclusion they'd win. Actually, there was a window in which maybe this new Fnatic team could be really good if the rookie Nemesis shows up well, or maybe also like Broxah continues to develop, or you look elsewhere, you had the OG team bringing Mithy back in, had all these really solid to above average to good to elite level players at all the positions, and they seem like a smart team, so they have a different way to win entirely. Or maybe the Misfits super team that's put together with a bunch of big names from history, maybe they can do something. So what's weird is, despite 3 of them, Perkz, Jankos and Wunder, losing to Caps previously when he was in Fnatic, when, by the way, he was considered the best Western player, and then recruiting him, there actually wasn't a lot of backlash against Caps for going. Not really one they do as much, but the players for recruitment. It wasn't kind of a sense of like, you couldn't beat Fnatic, so you had to recruit. People just thought this is a cool team. Like, wow, Caps' move is interesting. Like, that's kind of out of left field. But I will say, this has actually made us go the other way, where it's not that I want people to hate on them, but I think now people actually have been way too... I think actually they think they're being fair, but they're actually being unfair, where they treat all 5 of the G2 players like they were equally important, they contributed equally, I'm talking about in an objective sense here, not relative to their role or their role within the team, to the wins and the trophies, and as a result, who the best player was. It can't just be that they're all the best player because they're on G2. It's one of the reasons why I'm glad even when they win, people don't just put their entire team as the all-pro team. I think it'll be vastly unfair. Experts and historians, that's one of our jobs. When we're trying to tell history, we're also, by gathering all the context and attempting to understand it and put it into our model, we're trying to also characterize how it happened, the way it happened, some of the factors that were more important, make a hierarchy of which one means more in this sense, or how did this lead to that, or was this something that was an exception that proved the rule, or did it actually show that this overall theory is a little bit weaker than we thought, or does it add to it, does it confirm it? So as a result, in my opinion, you're supposed to, as an expert or historian, be looking at things like, how do I figure out who the star player was, or who at this point in time was the better player? Who were they playing around here? Who got more resources? Who was more sacrificial? As a result, who is the main star? Who has the share of the load? Who gives up the share of the load? That's one of the reasons why historically I didn't give Reckless full credit, at least in an AD carry versus AD carry, or just a pure player versus player comparison, for the titles he won with Expeke and Soaz. I actually thought in those teams he wasn't the best player. Sometimes he wasn't even the second best player. And you look at some of the other players that he played with, I think as many other AD carries could probably would have won if they'd have been in his position, and he wasn't as integral to it as some of the other players in the team. So it's not just his championship, it was someone else's championship that he had a part to play in it. Sometimes smaller, sometimes greater. Later in his career, if he'd have won the championship the last year or two, he would have been the main player that had done that. And now Nemesis or Whipple would be the ones getting the reckless treatment in that regard. Now, I will say, G2 wasn't as strict, in my opinion, in the division of labour who did what, as those Fnatic teams. Like, one of the things I liked about the G2 super team is they had so many good players who had been star-level players elsewhere that they actually could use that to their advantage and rotate around, and certain people could be better at certain points of time and pick up the slack when someone else had their issues. So as a result, like, I would even contrast them, if you know CSGO, with the Fnatic team of late 2014, early 2015, or mainly most of 2015 actually, at the time considered the greatest CSGO team of all time, because they weren't just like, Olaf Meister was their caps at one point in time. But before that, they had other players like JW and Crims were the best at some point in time. Flusher would be amazing at majors. They almost like took it in turns, depending on what month it was, what period of the meta it was, what maps they were playing. So I feel like G2 to some degree had some of that, but even so, the majority of the time, put a pin in just throw a dart at a timeline of how long they played together. Caps was probably the best player, or top two, and if someone else took a spot there, he was the one that always stayed top two, and they maybe went up first to fourth, first to third, first to fifth, depending on what happened. Like, obviously, in spring of season 9, Perkz was very, very good. Internationally, he was very, very good. But there were times also where he wasn't as good. He wasn't as good in season 10, wasn't even close to it. Sometimes he was maybe the fourth or fifth best player. Wonder, sporadically, season 9 spring himself. Later on, maybe season 9 summer, if you want to count it. Times when he was a stud, but was he better than Caps? No, those are Caps' best splits, arguably. Jankos in summer season 9, when Caps had some issues to some degree, was still very, very good, to be fair. He was probably the main contender for MVP along with Jankos. You could say Jankos was the MVP. He obviously did win MVP at that point in time. Mickey never really was at that status, but he also plays the role of support, so it makes more sense. Now, let's contrast that, the point of this video, with Golden State Warriors from a few years ago. Because the Golden State Warriors won in, I think it was 2016, when they beat the Cavs. And then, 2015, depends when you count the seasons, if you say the first year or the last year. Then they lost to the Cavs narrowly in 7 games the next year. There was some extenuating factors, but whatever, it's a result. Now, during that season, because they'd lost, but also in the conference finals, they themselves, people forget this, yeah, the Warriors blew a 3-1 lead in the final, but they also beat a team that blew a 3-1 lead in the conference finals when they played the Oklahoma Thunder of Westbrook and Durant, etc. And they won in 7 games after coming back from down 3-1. So that's where, by the way, if you don't know, the famous like Clay Game 6 narrative comes from, where he just hard carries the Game 6s, as he almost was even against Toronto until he got injured. Now, in the off-season, Kevin Durant, the star player, the MVP candidate, the MVP in the past of the Thunder, joined the Golden State Warriors, thought to be the best team. They somewhat easily won the next 2 finals over the same Cavs team with a few different alterations. And quite frankly, they might have won 3 in a row if injuries hadn't hampered them when they got the year that they played the Raptors. Now, what's interesting is this team was not celebrated at all in the same way as G2 and hailed for all being so good. What happened was people were so mad at the initial move that Kevin Durant dared to leave the Thunder in that way, whereas like a Michael Jordan probably stays in that position, they think, and just says, bring the talent to me. The idea that he went and joined the best team, and the team that had just beaten him, and the best team overall, they thought, this is just BS. Like, he's just making it too easy for himself. Like, they have too many stars, so all the titles can't count for all of them. Like, they don't all just get to launch into top 10, top 20 players of all time, etc. And so, let's face it, you could summarize it like this. Something's got to give. Who does it give between Durant, Curry, and Klay Thompson? Because in that kind of a scenario, it's like you're blaming Kevin Durant for joining, but then Steph Curry later on sort of gave up the main star spot. Klay Thompson was willing to be pushed in the background after being sort of like a Robin / a 1B option, depending on what period of time we're talking about. But the interesting thing for me is, while you certainly can, in terms of like, what was his motivation, or does he actually know that all championships aren't counted equal to some people? Yeah, you can justifiably criticise Durant for making it easier in terms of getting help and joining the team that beat him. But in my opinion, once he got to the Golden State Warriors, the way he played and conducted himself and the times he demanded the ball and the scenarios in which he was the best player, he alphaed that shit. As a player, he made that his team. He was the best player. He's the main reason they won those championships. And so actually, to me, he somewhat started to turn the narrative. The first part remains the same, but he actually turned that narrative, in my opinion, by the time he left. Hence why, I think rightfully so, he won those finals MVPs. Now, I'm not contrasting the move itself, because in terms of Caps coming over to G2, if anything, it was like if it had gone the other way around, if Steph Curry had gone and joined the Thunder, because Caps was beating G2 and placing ahead of them and wherever they placed, sometimes internationally, and then he went over to G2. So this is no diss to Caps at all. He's not really that relevant in terms of what he did individually. It's more the effect that he had on Perkz and the rest of the team. I'd even contrast what he did with when Deion Sanders, the legendary cornerback, went from the 49ers when they won the championship. The next year, he went to the Cowboys, their main rival in that conference, and he won the championship with them as well, and was not the main reason, but he was clearly a factor in each of the teams winning, because obviously they had a mismatch at that position. Now, Steph Curry, before Durant, was considered to be held in very high esteem. He was a 2-time MVP. He was considered the best player in the game. A lot of people were projecting wow, could he be a top 10 player ever? Is he going to completely revolutionize what shooting means and how you build your team even? This was some really amazing stuff. After Durant, he was somewhat the Robin to Kevin Durant's Batman a lot of the time. It's only now, when his team's trash and he has to take a million shots and frag out again, as it were in CS terminology, just shoot his way out the game like he did in the early Warriors, that he's now getting back to some semblance of what he used to be, what he used to represent, getting that status as I'm the alpha dog, I'm the main reason this team wins, and whatever happens, it's because of me. Now, the interesting thing there is, let's take that discussion and go back in a League of Legends. Because if I'm counting the titles they won together, obviously already Caps and Perkz have won an incredible amount of LEC titles. They got international championship on their belt in the MSI. The thing is, if I'm counting those titles and placings, Caps gets more of the credit historically than Perkz does. Certainly with the others, I have to do a similar thing as well. They have to look at the division. But overall, between the two, those go more for Caps than Perkz. And if I'm doing Caps versus Perkz, that's helping Caps in the argument. So one of the reasons why also, the factor that Perkz was the captain and the leader, yes, certainly. But the credit you give to that sort of a player is different. And it's not really that applicable, in my opinion, for the best player conversations. It's different in terms of I know how to win, but in terms of I was the captain, that ain't enough, especially because it can be a very ephemeral thing where you don't always know who is the captain in some teams. Otherwise, let's be real, if you go back in time to season 4, by that logic, High is better than Bjergsen as a player. Now, listen, as a captain he is, as a player, no way. Bjergsen's certainly better, certainly more skilled, certainly able to do better individual performances, could win many more teams. There's a million factors we're talking about here. Now, the point is, Caps also won with and without Perkz. That helps the argument. He was the best player, more splits during the time they played together. He was the best at his position and the best in the region overall as a player during the time they played together most of the time. Perkz was at best usually a 1B to 1A option if he was on that level. Most of the time not, in my opinion. Meanwhile, Perkz was the best years ago, sure. But he was the second best during Caps' tenure at best. That was when he was in Fnatic, he was probably the second best player or mid laner. And when they were in G2, he was usually at best the second best player. So I actually hope personally that similarly to Durant himself, even though his narrative changed, going elsewhere and trying to stake a new claim elsewhere, make a team else. Let's forget the fact that they've just made another super team. We didn't know that was going to happen. We thought it was just him and Kyrie Irving at first. He was going to do it himself. I thought he got how to do it like a samurai. But let's ignore that. I hope personally, and it's kind of implied that that's part of why Perkz left. It isn't just that he wants to play mid, it's that he wants to be even more legendary. He wants to accomplish even greater things. He doesn't just want to stack more championships as a Robin or just part of the Justice League. He wants to be Superman, doesn't he? He wants to be the main guy. And all that kind of scoffed the analogy there because Robin's the sidekick to Batman. But you get the premise of what I'm talking about here. To me, I think this is maybe even more of the Mithy influence, where Mithy was just quite frank in his reflections interview that he wanted to leave G2 to go and join TSM to beat Perkz, to win championships without Perkz, to show that, hey, it wasn't just Perkz the reason I won these championships. He wanted to beat former teammates, former teams he'd played with. I think that's cool as fuck. Those championships count more, in my opinion, than the ones where you just all stay together in a mega team. You were never going to lose as a team in theory, and you just all stack the championships. Especially if you're not the main guy getting those championships. So one of the other things I love about this is it's a way he could potentially extend his own individual greatness in a way that could let him catch up to and overtake what Caps is doing now. Historically, I consider Perkz greater, but if we're matching the two up currently, Caps is ahead of him, and at the moment, Perkz hasn't, until he starts playing mid lane and is successful at Cloud9, hasn't shown that he's going to actually catch up the current gap that they have between them. So unless somehow he'd been as good at AD carry as he was as mid, which wasn't that likely, it just wasn't going to happen. And even then, the AD carry role traditionally doesn't have the same agency on the map and impact on the game overall, so it's just a lot harder. I mean, let's be real, when Doublelift and Bjergsen played together, who won the MVPs? Who got credited as the best player? It doesn't matter how well Bjergsen played and how well Doublelift played, it was going to be Bjergsen because they were both extremely good. good and they won the championship. So the star mid laner won the title. So in my opinion, this could lead to a very cool dynamic, because even though they aren't playing domestically as much, I want to see Perkz test himself against what Caps is directly, what Caps represents, and be the Caps of Cloud9, as it were. Even comparable, by the way, to that whole thing where KD took a different career route. He's also trying to do that. He's trying to, now I'm going to go and win in LCS. I'm going to have different accomplishments than what Caps has got overall. This is also a little bit like how Kobe said he was very motivated to win when he knew people said, oh, you're only winning because you got Shaq. He wanted to play without Shaq, and then he wanted to win without Shaq to show that I don't need Shaq to win. I hope that that's what Perkz is trying to do now to Caps, because let's be real, they've played together for a few years, and so as a result, Perkz' last championship without Caps was in 2017. It is 2021 now. So as a result, if he wants to now really establish himself as I was the greatest to ever play from the Western regions, now is the time to do it. And I know that Perkz, he wants to win an MSI or a Worlds as the main piece, as the star mid laner, as what he started his career at and initially got his success as. If he gets to what he's done in the past, finals, semis, which he did in G2. Yeah, that was sick. He did that as a mid laner. Problem is, Caps has beaten those. Caps has done bigger things. Caps has done it while he was in his team as well. So, I mean, you could, by the way, you could take that as a blow against Caps if you want to argue that way, but let's ignore that for a second. Because let's be real. I know to some people, it's just like, well, who cares? If you win, why wouldn't you rather win 8 championships than 5? Or wouldn't you rather win 12 than 10? No, because again, all championships aren't equal. So in my opinion, what I love about this is, I think Perkz actually gets it, which is that competition isn't just about winning. Winning is a byproduct. Competition is about testing yourself. It's about seeing what you're made of. It's about seeing where you're strong and where you're weak. It's about finding out how you perform when the game doesn't matter. It's about how you perform when the game matters the most, when it's the most important game. And Perkz gets it. So Caps Durant'd Perkz when he came over to G2. It was Perkz' team initially, and it was spiritually as a captain, but it was Caps' team in terms of who's the best player, who's the leader by example in the server. And so now Caps is in a position where he's got his own team to shine with without Perkz. Now let's see what Perkz can do elsewhere, and if he can become again the dominant player he was in 2016 and 2017. This video was kindly supported by Lagger15, Pronogo, Andrew, Dean Tanglis, Animosity, ErikHillestad, Andreas Kroknes, Hades, Jensen Goh, Zoomba, JDubs, Tobias Bernasconi, Alexander Rao, and as always, a special thanks goes out to Jerky's Minion. Would you like to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Want to ask a question in one of my monthly video AMAs? Do you want teasers? See who's going to be on my next interviews and shows? Maybe you want to take part in a discussion with me where we go anywhere. We had a mad one talking about chess the other month. If so, put your money where your mouth is and join the Skrilluminati today at the link in the description box below.